By 2050, some experts predict that you'll have more intimate encounters with machines than humans. Sounds crazy? I certainly hope so. I'm Dr. Rena Malik, urologist and pelvic surgeon, and today we're talking about the impact of sex dolls and AI robots on people and their relationships. The reality is there's a growing number of people forming relationships with synthetic partners, meaning high-end silicone sex dolls, robotic companions with AI personalities, and digital avatars that are designed for intimacy. Now, people think about this in one of two ways. One, it's a dangerous tool that allows sexual objectification, or conversely, they're options for addressing loneliness and potentially even sexual health needs. But what does the research tell us? Today, I'm breaking down findings from multiple scientific reviews covering over 100 studies. We'll look at who is actually using these technologies, why they're using them, and whether there are some psychological red flags, and what this means for the future of human connection. Now, before I get into it, I want to share with you guys, I have a free ebook with my top 10 tips for maximizing pleasure. It's completely free. I'd love for you to check it out at renamalikmd.com/morepleasure. First, let me define what exactly we're discussing because sometimes there's a little bit of confusion. Now, traditional sex dolls are life-sized, anatomically detailed figures, usually made from silicone or thermoplastic. They can weigh anywhere from 30 to 50 kilograms, which is up to over 100 pounds. It's like carrying a large dog around. Some of them are customizable with eye color, body proportions, and even facial expressions. And depending on the quality and how much customization you get, the prices can range from $600 to $8,000 or more. Now, sex robots take this one step further. They include sensors, motors, and even artificial intelligence. Current models can hold basic conversations, move their heads, sounds like they're breathing, they can even respond to touch. They're essentially interactive dolls and they have limited autonomy. The technology is still, pretty rudimentary, nowhere near like what you're seeing in Hollywood movies. And then there's what researchers call personified sex tech or digital companions. Think AI chatbots designed for romantic conversation, virtual reality partners, or even app-controlled devices that can be synchronized remotely. Now, this category is exploding because it sidesteps some of the biggest barriers: cost, storage of a very large sex doll, and the stigma of having a sex doll. Now, how commonly are people using this? So a German population study looked at 2,000 adults and found that 9% of men and 2% of women reported using a sex doll at least once. And industry data would suggest that they did see a demand spike during the pandemic, and retailers saw sales increase anywhere from 30 to 100% in 2020. Most of the research that's done on this area samples online forums. So these are forums usually where doll owners gather to share photos, how they maintain their dolls, and stories. One study analyzed 41 users. They found that 75% of them were men, 17% were women, and the remaining were non-binary or transgender users. The majority, however, were heterosexual. Another study with 83 forum members found a similar pattern: 90% male, average age was over 40, and nearly half were single. But what surprised me was that 22% were married or in committed relationships. And some people even owned multiple dolls and they treated them sort of like a family dynamic. When you look at the totality of the data, the majority of the studies show that 70% of owners are over 40. This isn't usually a young man in a basement sort of situation. It's middle-aged guys who often have stable careers, who are making deliberate choices about how they want to be intimate with a sex doll. Now, why do people use it? Well, in one small study, they found that 16% wanted sexual gratification. Other studies report that number is a lot higher, right? 77%, which makes more sense. Now, the truth is that people use these devices for sex, but they also use it for companionship, for photography projects, for collecting, and even as props for creative work. Some of them use them as transitional objects, meaning it helps them process certain grief or trauma. Now, the big question is, are these people who use sex dolls psychologically distinct from other people? Now, one of the larger studies looked at 158 doll owners compared to 135 men who didn't own dolls. And they use these validated psychological surveys or assessments. And they found that on most measures, depression, anxiety, life satisfaction, there was really no significant differences. Sex doll owners weren't more isolated or more unhappy, and they actually scored lower on borderline personality traits compared to the comparison group. They did, however, score higher on measures related to sexual objectification, meaning they were more likely to view women as sex objects, express some sexual entitlement, and see women as fundamentally unknowable. Now, psychoanalysts have documented patients who use dolls as part of their therapeutic work, and they'll report case studies. So one case described a man who experienced childhood trauma and failed marriages. He ultimately bought a doll, named her, began a 2-year relationship with her, and his therapist initially was sort of put off by it, but came to see that the doll was like this transitional object, something that allows him to practice intimacy in a safe way before re-engaging with human partners. I could also see this as a way when you're struggling with certain parts of your body or certain things, it might be nice to have sort of something to practice on. Now let's talk about robots. This is where the debate gets even more intense. So a survey of 72 sex therapists and physicians in German-speaking countries found that 45% could imagine recommending a sex robot in clinical practice. That's nearly half that are open to the idea. But they did raise some major concerns. One, there's currently no evidence for benefits and potentially risks around reinforcing harmful stereotypes. Now, when you look at doll owners, when they own sex dolls, do they want sex robots? So 58% of them said they'd be interested in upgrading to a robot because they're curious, they want better interaction with their doll, but also they were concerned about sort of emotional manipulation from an AI, sort of figure. Now, this is why there's so much sort of controversy around it. The sex doll market is overwhelmingly geared towards heterosexual male fantasies. They have young-looking, hyper-feminine partners who are essentially eternally compliant. And critics argue that it's not harmless, right? It's the objectification of women. They're reducing a person to customizable parts available on demand, incapable of saying no. And they worry that this could normalize those attitudes towards real women. Defenders will say, no, these are just fantasies, and sexual fantasies always include an unrealistic, exaggerated elements. That's what makes it a fantasy. And they do argue for diversifying designs, making tech that serves women, queer users, people with disabilities, rather than banning it outright. Now, I generally think both sides have valid points, but at the end of the day, people who make this technology are going to continue making them, and the technology is going to advance and get better and potentially even more cost effective. Now, I do think that because these dolls are so big, it will limit how widespread their use goes, but I don't think they're going away. Now, here's a trend I think is going to be even more volatile, and that's AI chatbots. These, just like ChatGPT, right, they can learn your preferences, they can have realistic avatars, and sometimes there's even these remote controlled devices that can sync with this digital persona. So are people interested in this? So in a US study, there was 7,500 people, and they did a global study with over 130,000 women across 191 countries. And they basically looked at these different studies, and they found that the appeal depends on the type of device, the cultural context, and how it's marketed. So could be good, could be bad, really depends. But here's the question: what happens when your AI companion knows everything about you, your desires, your insecurities, your daily routines, and now that data is owned by a corporation? And what happens when people start preferring digital partners to real people because they're easier and they're more predictable and they never have bad days? Now, some people would predict that by mid-century, intimacy with machines will be as common as FaceTime or video chatting is today. Others think it'll remain a niche, a curiosity, but nobody really knows. And so what we do know, again, is the technology here is advancing faster than any ethical regulations will. And I suspect there will be a time when people having erotic conversations with AI will be pretty common. And I saw a recent survey that suggested that the second most common reason people use AI is for companionship or friendship. And that's just a hop, skip, and a jump away from a romantic relationship. So I don't know. I do think it's going to be pretty common. I don't know how it's going to affect real partnerships, but I do hope that we continue to find value in real human beings and connection, because no one can obviate that need for a real person, for touch, for connection. You can't get that from a machine or an AI. Now, if you're someone trying a sex doll or an AI chatbot, just understand what you're hoping to get out of it and be aware that there might be psychological and social trade-offs that we haven't really thought about yet. But it could be helpful in some ways. It may address deeper issues like loneliness, trauma, and even sexual dysfunction. But I would suggest, if you're doing it for those purposes, do it with some sort of support, professional support, psychological support. And right now, the research is so limited, so it's not clear if it's good or bad. It's really complicated, but ultimately it's here, and we'll just have to keep watching. If you guys like this video, make sure to subscribe to the channel, and as always, remember to take care of yourself because you are worth it.